can be hurt really easily. They can find it hard to regulate their emotions.
Having someone to hold me accountable.
Yeah.
So in my case, it's my dad mainly.
Yeah.
He's like, Tom.
It's mad, isn't it?
Weird times.
Do you think there's also a part of it where people expected once the pandemic ended that it would go back to being really great again?
Yes.
We think we've had this massive upward curve of life's going to be really rosy, and then the reality hits that actually it's not all that great. That there's a huge after effect that's going to last a very, very long time. Do you think we expected that to happen and then maybe didn't?
Agreed. I think because you look at what kind of, we all went a bit mad, didn't we?
Yeah.
Completely mad.
Like booking on the holidays. And like,
Let's get out of it.
It was like the spring going bouncing all over the place. But I actually, interesting question, Joe, because the bit of the pandemic, which we were all living at the time, but we were just getting on with it, was we were traumatized.
Massively so.
It was trauma.
Yeah, massively so. Coming back to what Tom asked you about earlier when we mentioned about being outdoors, you're a big runner, aren't you?
I'm a big runner.
Yeah, so I saw on your page you love your running and being outdoors. Is that a recent thing or is that a...
No, I've been running for... It's my thing.
It's my
thing. Running for me is... that's how I regulate my mental health.
Love that.
Like, it's the best thing for me. It really is. And I'm very protective of it.
As you should
That's
be.
your thing.
Yeah,
It's my thing.
Yeah.
I don't run with people. It's like...
Rain or shine as well. You've seen us go in
It's
the
me.
rain.
Pouring in the snow and the rain.
I was running in Rio.
Love it.
It's because it just works for me. And if you speak to any of my patients, like they're like, oh, here, eye roll, here he goes talking about exercise again. But the science is so solid. Like, the science is top notch when it comes to mental health and exercise. So it's not just running. I'm like, do anything. Like, just get your nervous system energized, and it works. Like, so I practice what I preach.
Love that.
And I say that to my patients because they watch my videos. Oh, I saw you out running. I'm like, well, yeah, but I don't do it for, like, I don't wear a smartwatch, and I'm not trying to clock the pace. I'm not interested in that.
Like
It's the regulation. It works for me. So I'm not going to stop unless my knees give, which I probably will. But I'm not going to stop it.
No, good for you.
That's the exact same as Meg, my girlfriend. That she runs 5 times a week. And honestly, if she runs 3 times a week, she's a different person. I know it sounds so silly to people watching, but it helps her massively. All the stress when she comes back from a run seems to just go.
Yeah.
Whereas for me, I feel more stressed that I'm running. I'm like, I can't breathe. But for me, other things work.
Yeah.
But for her, running works. It must be the same for you as well. But I see such a big difference in her when she comes back after a run, which is amazing. One thing I wanted to touch on as well, you said earlier, but you were in the NHS.
That's right, 7 years.
7 years. For people who have watched this for a while, I have ADHD.
Yes.
Very bad ADHD. And I got diagnosed when I was 15, 16, so quite late.
That's quite late, yeah.
But when I went to the NHS, there was about a 4-year wait, which is just crazy.
Yeah.
And if I'm not lucky enough to have parents that could have sent me to go private, I wouldn't, it could be even a bit of an exaggeration, but I generally mean it is, I don't know if I'd be here. I was in such a bad place from my ADHD that spiraled out into depression and stuff. There'll be people watching this who are like me, but won't have the option to go private. What sort of advice would you give them on that aspect of things, ADHD wise?
Yeah. I'm sorry to hear that, and sadly that is, and I don't know there because I'm not in there anymore, but I know certainly anecdotally because I treat ADHD and I work with psychiatrists that I use to do the assessments, and they come back to me for the psychological treatment. But it's still a massive problem because the rates of ADHD, which is good, have gone up. And why I say that is because we know more about it and more people are being flagged. Whereas in the past, it was quite underdiagnosed, and maybe there was a lot of misdiagnosis because people didn't know what they were looking for, and also it wasn't so exposed as it is now. But I think it's very challenging for anyone to have that disorder and not have help. And I would think if you could do anything, then try and just get into any kind of support that you can. So if that's like watching this podcast, if that's getting into your GP, if it's getting into charities, whatever you can do. The diagnosis is hugely important because the diagnosis opens the doors then to medication and treatment. And in lots of cases of ADHD, that's what you need. So I'd say most of my patients with ADHD, pretty much all of them, they're on medication to obviously help chemically stabilize the brain.
Is that Ritalin?
They could be Ritalin, yeah, or they could be on Elvans, or just the other ones, which are the non-stimulant ones. So the ones that are more kind of, they take a little bit longer.
I had that one as well, yeah. I did Ritalin and the non-stimulant one.
Yeah, so it can be a bit, with the meds, not every patient, it's like any medication, not every patient responds. You hope they're going to respond well to the medication, but it can be trial and error. And sometimes it can take a while to get the right medication for that patient. So while we're getting all that sorted, then the support comes in with me to help them to understand and to manage their ADHD. And then we're pulling in the psychiatrists as well. So I appreciate it is challenging, and
super challenging.
And even if you go privately, the wait can be up to
it's crazy.
6 months.
It's a shame.
Yeah,
I think one of my biggest pet peeves with ADHD is a lot of people, like my friends and stuff, are like, "Yeah, I must have ADHD. Like I'm super hyperactive."
No.
It's like, mate, that's not what ADHD is. But it's quite hard to explain if you don't really know, because you just think you're hyperactive or you can't focus for 10 minutes.
That's a subtype.
It really winds me up where they can't focus for like more than 10 minutes. They're like, I must have ADHD. No. It's like, it's so much more than that. So for the people who don't know, can you kind of explain some of the main core symptoms and things like that? Because hyperactivity is one of the symptoms of one aspect, but I mean, there's so much more to it.
Yeah.
Can you sort of give it more of a brief? Because you could do it way better than I can.
We could be here for hours, literally, if I jump into this conversation. So I like to break down the letters. So A, attention. So the person will have a problem with attention. So that's attention on lots of levels. So they may struggle to focus on conversation. Their mind will drift. They will interrupt conversations. Their focus will drift quite quickly, even if they're struggling to focus on something. The attention is a problem. Deficit. So deficit is that comes into deficits on a more wider level. So one of the big things around, and you will probably realise this, Tom, is the emotion regulation. So the deficit in regulating emotions. So why I love working with people with ADHD is this: they're beautiful, sensitive souls. They really are. They're very tuned in. They're very expert, and they can read the room in a heartbeat, because the emotions are peaking in terms of what's happening in their brain. But the deficit in that is they can be hurt really easily. They can find it hard to regulate their emotions. They might have behavioural problems because their emotions aren't being regulated. So you see the deficits in the emotional regulation, which comes out in the behaviour. The hyperactivity piece is, again, not everybody has that. So that's just where the nervous system is hyper aroused, and you might find that they're up and down. And I have it in my office with the ones that have the hyperactivity piece. They're on the floor and on the sofa and they're doing all kinds of things. Fine. that's just what's going on. And then the D bit, which I think is really important, and this is what separates out what you were saying about your friends to people who actually have the diagnosis. It's disorder. So it's not just a bad 10 minutes of focus. It causes proper problems in day-to-day functioning. So the young people and the adults, especially young people that I see that have ADHD, some of them have terrible problems going to school. Some of them are not going to school. It just doesn't work. So you're not just seeing like a little bit of difficulty. It's big. It is big. Yeah. And the disorder now is actually disrupting the life of that person.
Yeah.
And it becomes a massive challenge.
I found school incredibly hard. We've talked about this quite a few times. It's hard to explain, but I think now I'm older and I understand, and I spent years trying to figure out like my body and how I work and operate. Is I feel like I didn't do school well because it was super regimented.
Yeah.
It was done a certain way, and if you weren't in that certain way, you were sort of on the edge of things, and you were put to the bottom set of everything. Even though in my case, I'm actually a very smart guy. I ended up doing really well.
It's got nothing to do with intelligence.
Yeah, but it's just like I didn't fit the mold.
Yeah.
And I think it makes me incredibly creative from a positive standpoint. And it's also, I was so motivated to launch my own business because I don't fit into those regimented things. Is that something you see a lot with ADHD people?
All the time, yeah, all the time. Because that is the beauty of the condition. I know it can be a bit of a curse as well, but what I often say to my ADHD patients is ADHD patients are the ideas people. They come up with the most incredible ideas. The problem they have is the follow through.
Yeah, the execution of it. That's me my whole life. Yeah. I think this might not be backed by science or whatever, but I just found like having someone to hold me accountable. Yeah. So in my case, it's my dad mainly. Yeah. He's like, Tom, let's stay disciplined on this. I know your mind's going to wander and you're going to go outside. And I can almost see now from a third person point of view, my mind's going, get out of here, bro. Let's go. Yeah. But I just, having someone there like my dad being like, stay on the path, stay on the path, focus. I know you're going to lose it in a couple of days. And I've finally understood that now, where I've building a line of discipline for myself, but it makes me feel rubbish because my body is like, please don't do that, Tom. Like, please don't do that. But unfortunately, you can't really do anything in life unless you have that discipline to do it. Yeah. And that's something that took me so long, and I've only probably got it over the last 7-8 months. Yeah. Is it's really hard to stay on one path and not just do like 10 different things at once.
But that's just your neurodiversity. That is it. That's where ADHD can be brilliant, because in terms of they're great in a crisis because they can think really quickly, and also brilliant at multitasking, but only to a point. Because then, as you'll notice, Tom, then you fall into procrastination. You fall into, that's more interesting. And then your brain becomes understimulated and you think, I don't want to do that. So the follow through is always the hard part, because maintaining the focus is difficult. And also then when your feelings get involved, you'll be like, I don't want to do that.
Yeah. Would you say then that, I guess it's a two-parter, would you say that one, it's misdiagnosed in teenagers because of the teenage years that you go through and hormones being all over the place? And two, I guess if you are a teenager, you're most likely to be in school. Are schools failing young children because they're not a place for people with ADHD to be able to thrive and cope?
Yes and yes. So totally, Joe. So the first bit...
it's a great question.
Yeah. Unfortunately, if you don't understand ADHD, you'll just go on what you see. And the kids with ADHD would be the kids that are disrupting the class.
Or staring out the window.
Completely daydreaming. They don't do their homework. They don't turn up on time. They get up and wander around the class. They're those kids. So you look at them and think,
it's almost me.
All behavioural problems. And then they end up getting detentions, and they end up getting all these behavioural disciplines. And you're like...
It does nothing.
It does absolutely nothing. And the punishments become meaningless. But then the message that sends to the young person is, you're a problem, not you have a problem. And so what that feeds then is, it feeds that sense of like very low self-esteem. I am worthless. I am not as good as my friends. And so the second bit of that question, which is, are they failing? Yes, some schools are brilliant. So I work with quite a few schools. It's a mixed bag. Okay. Some of them are terrific because they are all over this. They know what they're looking for. They know how to understand it. But some of them are still falling behind when it actually comes to, could this be neurodiversity, what we're seeing here? And when they come in, I've been treating it for so long now, you'll pick it up so quickly. Like so quickly. You'll just kind of, you get a sense for it, and you say, yeah.
Cool.
And you'll explain why. And when you go into the history, I mean, it's like, it's crystal clear. And I've often had, especially adult patients. I remember one adult patient, he was in his late 20s, and I said, I think you might have ADHD. And he said, what? And I said, yeah. And he said, but why did nobody say this to me before? I said, well, sometimes people aren't trained enough in it and whatever. I said, listen, I don't do the ADHD assessments because I bounce them to my psychiatry friends because when they do I can do them, psychologists can, but why I let the psychiatrist do it is psychologists don't medicate. We do all the psychological treatment. Psychiatrists can do both. They can do the assessments and the meds. So I just think, well, listen, let's just keep it easy and we'll get the assessment done, and the assessment comes back positive, then we can get the medication in place straight away. And so I bounced this patient to one of my mates, psychiatrist mates, to do the assessment, and he was livid.
Yeah.
Livid.
Really?
Absolutely livid.
I think it's a breath of fresh air as well when you find out you do have it. Because I just always thought I was some sort of maverick kid, and then I think it doesn't really click with parents either, because it comes to the point where you might probably find this is your child just a bit immature, or is it ADHD? And I feel like it's such a hard age, especially when you're like 10 or something. How do you spot the difference between immaturity and ADHD if you don't even really know what you're looking for?
Yeah.
And that's why I always get so frustrated with people when they're like, I can't focus. Like, I should just have ADHD. It's like, it's so much more than that. Obviously, if you just found out. It's so
much more, because the thing is, you've got to look at it from there's 500 different types of symptoms of ADHD. Now, obviously, you're not going looking for all of those, but you are looking just for the markers that will tell you. And in order for you to be able to understand it, you have to hear the story. You've got to hear the story. Yeah, so I listen to the story. If it's my teenager, I'm listening to them. I listen to the parents. I write, like, what was it like raising this child? Tell me. And so once you start to hear the story,
just
like
clicks.
Literally everything falls into place.
Yeah.
Like, well, this is it. Yeah.
Can you give some advice for the parents out there whose children might have ADHD, or they're going through that process of not sort of that grey area where they're like, do I go down the route of seeing a psychologist?
Yeah. What
advice would you give to them?
I would say with that, first of all, parents will know their child better than anybody else because they've raised this child. So I'd be looking for things like, have you noticed that your child is showing signs of maybe that they're repeatedly on a daily basis struggling to get through the day, where there is challenges, where there's maybe meltdowns, and the child is maybe showing signs of psychological distress. Because that's kind of what you're looking for. You're looking to see, okay, is this something that's a bit more prolonged? So are we seeing a pattern here now where the teachers are giving feedback that the child's a bit of a nightmare, where you're seeing signs of maybe that they're struggling to switch off from devices, or they don't want to go to bed, or that they're struggling to regulate? So it's a bit of a tricky one, Tom, that question where you said about immaturity, because roughly with ADHD, it's not a developmental delay. You're not looking at that, because we're not dealing with something that's an educational problem. But in terms of brain development, you're looking at about a 3-year delay.
3-year delay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what that would mean is that you'd have maybe, say, a 16-year-old, and maybe the way that they're dealing with their life would be as a 13-year-old. Now, the reason for that is because the prefrontal cortex, which governs your executive functioning, that develops slower in an ADHD brain than it does in a non-ADHD brain. So if we give you, say, ADHD meds, then what we're doing is we're trying to speed up that part of your brain so that the brain can regulate itself. But if you have an overactive emotional brain, and then a slower prefrontal cortex, then that young person is going to be far more volatile, because they're going to massively struggle to regulate their emotions.
Yeah,
that's so interesting. I got one more question on ADHD as well, and this is more from a personal standpoint. Obviously, Joe and I play rugby. I take a lot of hits to the head.
Okay.
Does this, obviously not great, but I've stopped playing for a bit because I've had a load of concussions now, but every time, if anyone out there's like sort of struggling with that like I am, and mine have sort of died off now, it seems to spike it, and then I drop really quickly in sort of like my mood and how I feel and my clarity of thought, and I'm at a perfect level now, like I'm at the right level. I can tell in my body now. But if you're playing a contact sport and you have ADHD, what sort of advice would you give to someone there? Because I never even got told like it would make it worse. I just recognized it in myself, spotted the symptoms, and was like, okay, maybe I should have a little break for a bit.
Yeah, I think the problem there, and obviously I'm not a concussion expert, but if you're getting a blow to the head, especially with concussion, then the brain is trying to deal with the impact of the concussion. So it's then trying to accommodate to deal with the concussion element. So what it's then also trying to do is compensate as well with the neurodiversity. So if you've got the brain now, it's got two big things to try and cope with, then the body's incredible. It will prioritize one thing over the other. So obviously, like the concussion is going to be prioritized.
So it all goes there and then leaves the ADHD sort of
in chaos,
floating around being like,
interesting.
so interesting.
On that, does that mean you have to be very careful with medicating, say, a 13-year-old boy or girl because their brains are still developing?
Yeah, great question, Joe. We're very careful with that. Very, very careful. So medication is it's a conversation with the parents, obviously, and it's not taken lightly, because if you're going to give medication to a patient, then your whole rationale for doing that is that it's going to help the patient stabilize, and it's actually going to benefit them.
Yeah.
So that's your absolute focus there. So the conversation around medication is, will this medication help improve the quality of life of this person, and also will it help to improve their day-to-day functioning? And so that's your focus, and that's very much, it's a conversation with the parents, it's a conversation with the young person, and so we have those conversations, and if everybody's on board, then we try it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
But so far, with some medications, yes, the young people don't respond well to them, but that's a given. But most of the time, it's okay.
Okay.
It is okay.
Fine.
Yeah. And there's nothing although you're dealing with a developing brain, these medications, at this point in time, I have to say, there's no sign that they would cause any kind of
fantastic.
I love it. That's the best ADHD chat I've ever had in my life.
Hi guys, I hope you enjoyed part 2 first and foremost. If you are across YouTube, make sure you like and subscribe and do comment below. It really, really helps the channel out loads. Here's what you can expect in part 3. Enjoy. Does that mean you have to be very careful with medicating, say, a 13-year-old boy or girl because their brains are still developing?
Will this medication help improve the quality of life of this person? But if you're not relatable, you're done.